So, hello,
Hi.
welcome to the show, and it's great to meet you again.
You too.
Yeah, and it was really great to meet you. I believe it was like a meeting for for authors and artists. I don't remember right now, but when we met at El Cajon downtown,
Yeah.
and let me just shortly introduce you to our audience. So author Amanda Matti has revived cool writing style. And you know what a nice lady she is, even if you haven't met her in person. I did meet her also, and she, with her husband, and she has a powerful individuality, uh, characteristics, and it was really interesting to meet you guys. And also, you are the author of two books.
Yes.
One is titled A Foreign Affair, A True Story of Love and War. That was published in 2016.
Yes.
Okay. And Voicing the Eagle was published in 2017, like 1 year after.
Yes, they came out a year apart.
Oh. Okay, let me ask you this. In your book, A Foreign Affair, A True Story, you go over the transformation of your life, getting in the dangerous nature of serving in Iraq's war in 2005. And through this dangerous experience, you discovered your true love and on a foreign soil. Can you tell us about this book and like how you ended up writing it?
Well, here it is. That's the book. And I wrote it just because I felt I had a unique story. I was 22 and I deployed to Iraq with the military as a foreign affairs liaison officer. And I was stationed in the Green Zone, and a lot of my work dealt with interacting with Iraqi government personnel. And of course, I didn't speak Arabic. They didn't speak too much English at the time, so I needed a translator. So Fadi was assigned to me as my translator, and that's how we met. And from there, we spent a lot of time together, working, obviously, there in Iraq. And we fell in love.
That's cool. And I find, I mean, your book, the writing style, is really interesting because you give like a vivid description of what you have been through, which is very important for an author to do.
Thank you.
Yeah, so can you tell me, like, when you fell in love with your husband, Fadi, did you find any differences, like in culture, in points of view, or he was like ready, like from the beginning?
Well, of course, we were very different. I mean, we're from opposite sides of the world. Yes. So, yes, culturally, we were very different. It felt like he was from another planet. Yes. And I'm sure I kind of felt a little bit like that. He's probably more, in tune with American culture than I was with Iraqi culture, obviously. Yes. Through movies and Hollywood, thanks to Hollywood. Yes. Everybody knows or thinks they know American culture thanks to Hollywood. Right. But yeah, for me, but I found it very interesting. I was just, he fascinated me. I thought he was fascinating. I was like I said, I was very young when I went over there. I was very naive. And it was amazing how I really grew up in that summer. I was only there for not even a full 4 months, but in that 4 months, I felt like I just did a lifetime of growing up and changing and learning. I was in the middle of a war. I went over there, completely, I had just been in the military for a few years. And of course, our mindset that was kind of in us and that had been kind of brainwashed into us. I hate to use that word, but it really was kind of brainwashed into us, was you're to go over there and shoot first and ask questions later and kill the Hajis, you know?
Yes.
It was, and so I went over there, you know, with a bit of that mindset, which I'm not proud of. But getting there and meeting Fadi and others, my eyes were open and a whole world opened up to me, and I learned so much, and he taught me so much. Even though our cultures were completely different, we had grown up in completely different places. We had even been kind of, you know, mentally brainwashed to be pitted against each other. It's amazing. It really is true that love can overcome, I guess, all of those obstacles and those odds. And then, of course, when we decided to have a relationship, his family and my family both were like, no.
Okay.
Yeah, so they were like, no, it'll never last. You're too different. You came from two different backgrounds. You can't build a lasting relationship. You won't be able to share a life together and be happy with each other. And I'm proud to say, I guess, that we kind of defied those odds. We've been married now for 13 years, 14 years.
That's great. You know, I had like, I know when I read your book, I found it that because I am from the same background, so I understand. Maybe I will be more able to understand your story than most Americans do, and also because my brother was just like her husband working as a translator with the U.S. Army, and I find, you know, it takes a great deal of courage, and if you, when I take a look at your story, I believe it was difficult for you to make such a decision, but you succeeded, which is great.
Okay. I'm hard-headed.
Which is good sometimes. So, reading through your book also, Foreign Affair starts with the story of your ex-boyfriend, Sean. When you have been writing this part, have you encountered any feelings of jealousy, or did your husband feel uncomfortable? Because I know how a Middle Eastern man can be jealous, or I mean, it's just our culture. Can you tell me about that?
Well, no, honestly, there was no issues. I mean, Fadi knew that about that I had a boyfriend, you know, from the time that we met. Even though my boyfriend and I had kind of broken up, of course, that's kind of a defense mechanism. I was like, yeah, I have a boyfriend, you know. Yeah. Even when I was over there. So I mean, he knew about, you know, Sean, and so when it came to writing the book, and of course Sean was, you know, a big part of the beginning and a big part of the reason why things went south for us, you know, in Iraq. So no, they're really, I mean, Fadi's pretty laid back. he's pretty, you know, and also too, I don't think Fadi's read the book. Believe it or not, he's never read. I mean, he might have read, you know, bits and pieces and parts here and there, but he's never sat down and read the book from cover to cover, because it's, you know, it's still hard. I mean, you've read it. There's some tough things in there, and I know how difficult it was for me to write. There were certain points where I had to put the book down, you know, when I was writing it, and just leave it for months at a time, because I didn't want to rehash all of the crap that we went through and the things that he went through. It was difficult. So I mean, it would be difficult for him to read. So I understand that. Someday, I told him, someday before you die, you have to read my book.
Well, it shows that your husband Fadi is an open-minded person.
He is, yeah, very.
Yeah, which is very good. Okay, can you also tell me about Okay, what do you think about the Iraq War? Because most Americans right now, they feel it was wrong and why we have been there. But how you deal with that at the same time that you discovered your life partner there? Like, yeah.
Yeah, how do you kind of like reason those two things?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean it's hard. It is. I mean, everybody of course asks us. They think that we have a unique view into this, or maybe a unique knowledge behind this. I mean, obviously, when I went over there again, I was very young, and I was in the military. I was just, I was doing what I was told. And as far as Fadi's concerned, obviously he wasn't too happy about, the Americans invading his country and spinning his life upside down. So it was tough, but I guess we both just we just evolved, and we kind of rolled with everything. And we never lost sight of who we were as people. And I think that helped a lot. As far as what we think about the Iraq War, I mean, Fadi doesn't blame the Americans for invading. He understands why we did it. We both, though, of course, I mean, going in and getting rid of Saddam, maybe not such a bad idea, but basically everything we did after that, there were probably better paths that we could have taken. It was just kind of mistake after mistake after mistake once we toppled, Saddam's regime. And I think that's, of course, and I think that's what a lot of people realize looking back. But of course, hindsight's 2020. I hate to say like, oh, we knew better at 22 or 23 how to, run a war or something like that. But I mean, hindsight's 2020. Looking back, just as, a person, just reading about it and researching, there were things along the way that we could have done differently, obviously, to ensure that the country didn't turn into a power vacuum and a place for Al-Qaeda and ISIS to spring up.
Yes. I mean, you described it very well, because I also had, I mean, I am from the region and I still see it as a very complicated picture. So, for a foreigner like an American to describe it this way, it's really cool. Yeah, like most Americans, unfortunately, don't even know where Iraq is, like even the location. And I agree with you that the American government could have done a better job, especially if they were not, like, they didn't allow, for example, the militias to exist in the first place.
Yeah. We just the American government had a very, very elementary knowledge of Iraq and its internal politics.
Yeah.
People in the higher echelons of the government just did not understand the people. They did not understand the dynamics of the country. They didn't understand even how Saddam was ruling. And I don't say anything that he did is justified, but there were reasons behind why he did certain things. And so, because we didn't have that knowledge, and we really didn't know the dynamics of the cultures and the clash of cultures that has been going on in Iraq for centuries already. So ever since the British drew the borders, because we didn't understand that, we totally botched, the post-war rebuild up, and we had this very, very horribly ignorant mindset of, well, Saddam was a Sunni, so all Sunnis are bad.
Yes.
Saddam was against the Shiites, or the Shiites were against Saddam, so all Shiites are good.
Yes.
So because we had that mindset, that right there just laid the groundwork for the utter mess that Iraq became after Saddam left.
Sectarian violence.
Yeah, the sectarian violence and all of that lovely stuff.
Yes. Yeah, that's true. And also, I hope that you don't forget also, the Kurds also had a hand in that equation, and especially the Kurds were, I mean, they were trying to separate themselves from Iraq. And
yeah, the Kurds have been trying to get independence for decades, if not longer.
And they were not ready for it. I mean, to be independent, you have to first build a nation, but they didn't. So, okay, on the way to writing a book and even going to Iraq, I believe that you started at least studying some foreign affairs, and I know that you have a bachelor in political science, right? Yeah,
I do.
Yeah, can you tell me about your experience with political science, why you loved that major? Yeah, how you ended up loving politics?
Well, I mean, it kind of just, I mean, I joined the Navy when I was 17, actually. I went to boot camp at 17. And then they sent me to the Defense Language Institute out in Monterey, California, and they made me a Russian linguist. Yeah. They taught me Russian. And then I got stationed in DC. So I was in DC as a Russian linguist. 9/11 happened while I was in the middle of my Russian training, so I was kicking myself for not learning Arabic. So I got sent to DC, and of course, being a Russian linguist at the end, at the end of the Cold War and after 9/11, there wasn't really much that they were doing with us. Yes. So I kind of just sat and twiddled my thumbs, at my duty station in DC. And then, of course, when we invaded Iraq, I volunteered to go over there because they were just looking for people that had security clearances. So I had a security clearance. I knew basic intel operations. Yeah. So they were like, well, we'll just send you over to Iraq, to do a little foreign affairs assignment. So, of course, deploying over there as a foreign affairs liaison officer, that really got me interested more in, international policy and international relations. And then, of course, after I learned everything that I did over there in Iraq, and I saw the dynamics, and I was at the center of, this war going on that our country was waging, I of course got even more interested. And I actually didn't finish my degree until after I got back from Iraq. Yeah, so I finished my degree after I got back from Iraq, and of course I was in the middle of trying to marry a man, from a foreign country. So that, of course, even more solidified my interest in international affairs and all that stuff. So that's really how I got into that. And then, of course, the political side of it came from when I was trying to get him out of Iraq. I learned a lot about our nation's immigration laws and how broken that system is. I learned a lot about, just our political mindset towards, foreigners and foreign nationals. And it blew my mind. I was like, our system is archaic, and these powerful people at the top of our government have no clue what they're doing. Yes. So, of course, then that, further pushed me to study it more, research it more, kind of more devote, my professional life to and my educational career to and all that good stuff. So that's basically what drove me towards that direction.
Yes. And I didn't know, why. I mean, I thought it's okay for an American soldier or officer to marry a foreign national or an Iraqi translator. But then when I discovered your story, I knew that there were limits on that, especially because you worked with the NSA. Can you tell us about this scandal? How you get in trouble?
Yeah, it was a lot more of a scandal than I thought it would be, especially, even having a security clearance and even, being in the military. American service members have been marrying foreigners since our country was born. Yes. You know what I mean? In World War II, how many guys came home with Japanese wives? How many guys came home with German wives? You know what I mean? So for me, knowing the history of everything, I didn't think it was going to be that weird of a thing, or that big of a deal, especially, it's the 21st century kind of a thing. Obviously, though, back then it was male service members marrying female foreigners. And I didn't realize that was going to be such a huge factor me being a female and marrying a male foreigner really seemed to just blow a lot of people's minds.
Wow.
And they didn't think, me as a woman, if you fall in love, you're gonna start spouting national secrets to him or something like that.
Yes.
Like you silly girls, we don't know how to contain our emotions ourselves when we're in love, so we're just gonna wreck the entire nation should we fall in love with a foreigner who might have nefarious goals or
like
yeah.
misogynist.
Yeah, oh definitely, it was unbelievable. I mean, when I came back, I said, well, first of all, Fadi was in a lot of danger because he had worked for the Americans. As you know, I'm sure your brother knows and everything. As soon as Al Qaeda or the resistance finds out that a local Iraqi is helping the Americans, he's branded a traitor.
Yes.
He's literally, Fadi had wanted posters with his picture hanging in mosques across Fallujah. He was coming home from work and finding hand grenades sitting on his doorstep with notes wrapped around them that said, "Stop working for the infidels or we're going to kill you and your family." So he was getting shot at when he would drive to the base, or when he would leave the base, he was literally getting shot at. So his life was in imminent danger because of the service that he was giving to our nation, because of the help that he was doing for us. And when he told the powers that be, and when I told, my, American bosses and the people above me, they basically shrugged and said, "Oh, there's nothing we can do to help him." And I said, well, that's crap. I mean, after everything he's done, he's literally bled for this country, and we're going to leave him to, hang out to dry. There's nothing that you're saying, there's nothing we can do to get him out of this situation. And so when they said that to me, I said, well, you know what? I'll get him out. So at the time, there's currently now a visa that translators can apply for, or at least there used to be.
Yes.
But at the time, that didn't exist yet. So there was no way for Fadi to get out of Iraq and into the US. So I brought him over. I decided to file for a fiancé visa and bring him over on a K-1 fiancé visa, mainly just to get him out of Iraq, to save his life. So we filed for that, and then when the Navy learned, that I was trying to bring over this Iraqi national, they flipped out. They freaked out. Oh my God, he's a terrorist. He's using you. He just, at best, he's using you for a green card. At worst, he's coming over here to do another 9/11.
Yeah.
And it was unbelievable. So of course they freaked out. They locked me up, basically. They shut off all my communication. They stopped everything. They put me through a disciplinary review board hearing, where basically you stand up and all of your bosses in the military yell at you and tell you what a shitbag you are. So I was standing up, in front of this, and they literally were saying things to me like, out of 350 million Americans you can marry, why do you have to marry an Iraqi? You're so pretty. And it was just unbelievable. I couldn't believe that this was the 21st century military saying these things and doing these things simply because I was female and I was trying to marry a foreign national that I had met in a war zone. So when that all happened, I realized just even more how broken and backwards our system still was. So that's what drove me to write the book. That's when I started writing the book, is when all this, started. And that's what drove me to where I am today.
Yes. So, I mean, in the Middle East, I mean, it's very normal to see such a thing done by dictatorial governments, tyrants. For example, Saddam forbid Iraqi women to give their national citizenship if they were to their kids if they were married to non-Iraqis. So, I mean, that's absolutely shocking to happen in America, one of the countries that call itself a democracy and a republic, and that which serves its citizens. But thanks to you, I mean, you opened many eyes to this, and we really need to fix this broken system. And okay, what do you think about what's happening right now? I mean, this coronavirus and how our president deals with it, especially after recently he suggested that people should use disinfectants and bleach or such a thing. Where do you see our country going to?
I mean, honestly, I don't think he needs any comment. He speaks pretty well for himself. It's you know, you don't really have to read between the lines with him. You get what you get with him, and he does say what he means and means what he says. But I mean, unfortunately, after I went through what I was going through, I did see improvement under Obama, and a little later, you know, when the ignorance started to die down a little bit, you know, for foreigners and Iraqis, and people, you know, stopped thinking that all Muslims, you know, were terrorists, and you know, it was starting to go a little bit in a more liberal direction as far as that's concerned, and people were starting to open their eyes, and it wasn't, you know, anymore where, I mean, when Fadi first came over here, he was afraid to speak in Arabic on his cell phone, you know, when we were in a store. Like, we would be like shopping at Walmart, and his phone would ring, and he would see that it was his mom calling, and he would have to speak to her in Arabic, so he would have to ignore the call so that he didn't have to pick up the phone and speak Arabic in the middle of Walmart, because you know, the looks and just people.
Yes.
It's just, you know, when they hear some dude speaking Arabic, you know, luckily, right. Luckily, you know, over the last, you know, few years, that changed a lot. And so we were seeing improvement. Even the military changed a lot and kind of went back on things. They kicked me out and gave me a general discharge. They came back a couple of years ago and were like, hey, we're willing to upgrade your discharge, you know, to honorable. We understand, you know, kind of what happened, and that you kind of got the short end of the stick on this. So we would offer, you know, to upgrade your discharge and stuff like that. So we were seeing, you know, we were happy to see these improvements. Now, of course, it seems like we're going backwards again. Obviously, you know, we were trying, the immigration system never got fixed. I mean, even under Obama, it was still a mess. People don't understand. They always say, you know, if you want to immigrate here, that's fine, but you need to stand in line and do it the right way. People don't understand that there really is no line. Yes. There is no way to immigrate here legally. If you are a guy living in Guatemala and you're like, I want a better life, I want to immigrate to the US, there is no way that you can do it. There is no legal way to do it. So there's no form you can fill out. There's no line you can stand in. And I think that's what people in America don't understand. They're like, they're being told these lies, like, oh, well, they're here illegally because they didn't want to stand in line, or they didn't want to do it the right way. Yeah, well, there is no right way to do it. And there hasn't been. And that's never been fixed under Obama or Bush or Trump or anybody. So obviously, because of that. And then, of course, the coronavirus now has just complicated everything. Yeah, everything's complicated even more now. Of course, people are, like you say, oh, Trump didn't do enough. Oh, Trump did more than he should have. I mean, again, hindsight's 2020. Yeah. So, and I mean, I'm no disease, you know, expert or infectious disease expert or anything like that. But yeah, I think everybody knows, has seen shortcomings and things that we could have done differently. Yeah. To maybe help out, but I guess it is what it is.
Well, I mean, it's cool to hear your point of view. I mean, I absolutely agree with you, because since I came here, I have heard like this kind of people who tell me, well, if you hate America, why you don't go back? And I tell them, well, if you see something wrong in politics, that doesn't mean that you hate the country. The opposite. When you criticize some politicians, that because you love America, you want to change things to be better. And
yeah, you need to change it. It's the same thing when people say that to me. I'm like, well, if you see a guy beating his wife in the street, you just turn around and go home because you don't like it? No, you intervene and you do something to stop it and change it.
yes, that's true. And believe me, the way to hear was not easy, as you say, and there was no correct way to do it. I remember even going through blood, and I have seen like a car exploded near the hotel where I was waiting for the embassy
Oh,
interview.
wow.
Yeah, so I know how it feels, and I know that your husband, for example, it feels like a war zone there, and even so, he was a translator, so it must be much more harder for him because he was on the list of the terrorists. And I believe that his family was suffering because of that too. And coming to this, can you tell me about your second book, Voicing the Eagle?
Oh,
What
yes.
is Voicing the Eagle, and yeah, and who is the eagle? If you can explain, please.
Yeah, the title is, I guess, kind of a play on words, voicing the eagle. Obviously, the eagle is the United States, and voicing the eagle, Fadi was the voice of the United States
Yes.
when he was a translator and going out on, like, he was one of the few local translators that would actually go out on missions with the Marines on patrols through Fallujah, through Ramadi. He worked with a civil affairs unit that was going door to door trying to, help the people and trying to weed out Al Qaeda at the time that was, hidden amongst the residents. So he, of course, did that. And so the book Voicing the Eagle is his story. It's actually more of, even though I wrote it second, it takes place before our story, so it's kind of a prequel.
Yes.
It's a prequel to A Foreign Affair, because when I met Fadi, he had already been working as a translator for the U.S. for 2.5 years, because I didn't get to Iraq until 2005. So he had been working as a translator since the war broke out, basically in 2003. So he had already worked with the Army. He had worked with the Marines. He had been shot. He had broken his arm when a Humvee he was riding and flipped over after being struck by an RPG. He had literally been fighting on the front lines for 2 years by the time I met him. So he had all these little stories that he would, tell me. There's just different things that happened. And again, another reason I found him fascinating when I met him was, these stories that he was telling me. He was, this local Iraqi kid who was living a double life. You know what I mean? He would put on a U.S. Marine uniform during the day and he was a Marine, or he would put on an Army uniform during the day and he was an American soldier. And then he would take off the uniform, put on his civilian clothes again, and go back home to his house in central Baghdad. So then he became an Iraqi again. He was literally straddling these two worlds for years. And I found that his point of view and the stories that he had and the experiences he had were very, very unique. Something that very few people experienced and even fewer have written about that is documented. So after a while, and I was hearing all these little stories here and there, I said, if we take all of your experiences and all your little stories and we put them together, you have a book and you should write a book. I will write your book. So that's what I did, and so that's why I decided to write it, and I wanted people to see. And we also, both of the books too are for our kids. We wrote them as kind of like a family history, I guess, kind of thing. So our kids can read about what their parents did, and the unique experiences that we had, and that's mainly why we did the books.
Yeah. So yeah, you are giving something to your, maybe even your grandkids. I mean, the future. And thank you for your insights and your all this the information you give us, and you open our eyes to what is happening. And I believe that we still need to reform the immigration, the government, Yeah, everything. We need people like you.
Yeah, there's a lot of reform that needs to happen still.
Yeah. Just before I end this great interview with you, do you have any other projects in your mind? Any books for the future?
I do actually. I recently completed my first venture into fiction. It's a novel. Since both of my other books, of course, are nonfiction. And the story, it's really easy to write nonfiction. I always say, everybody's like, oh, you wrote a book. And I'm like, it's really easy when it's nonfiction. The story's there. You just have to write it. You got all your characters, you know what's happening, you know your plot, you just write it down, you know? So that was super easy. And of course, after becoming an author and doing book tours and meeting other authors, I just found, you know, these other authors who could just pull stories out of their heads and write these, you know, fictional novels. It was amazing. And I thought it was unbelievable. And I would say, no, I could never do that. I could never do that. You know, my characters are there. Everything's there. How do you come up with everything? How do you know what they're thinking? How do you know what comes next? If it doesn't exist, you know, it's all imaginary. So I was like, well, you know what? Me being hard-headed and liking a challenge, I said, well, you know what? I'm going to try it. Yeah. So I decided, you know, I took the plunge last year. I had this idea in my head, and I had these characters, you know, that kind of like were invading my mindset for several months. And I said, you know what, I think there's a story here, and it's not too, I mean, it's not like Lord of the Rings fantasy or anything. Yeah. So it's still, you know, rooted in kind of like, it's more of a historical fiction, military fiction. And I kind of got the concept and the idea from my Fadi's and my story. Yes. Because when we got together, everybody was saying, oh, he could be a terrorist. Oh, he could be this. He could be this really, this evil mastermind that's using you and all this stuff. Of course he wasn't. But what if he was? Okay. That's kind of what the story is. It's like an alternate universe. Had Fadi and I taken different paths, had Fadi ended up on the wrong side of things, had he had, you know, nefarious, you know, motives and stuff like that for being with me. So that's what the new book is. It's called New Dawn Underground, which is the name of a fictional terrorist organization like Al-Qaeda. So that one is currently being edited right now. Of course, with all the coronavirus stuff, we don't know when it'll be released or ready to be published, but right now it's going through editing. It is done, and hopefully soon it'll be released.
Oh, okay. Good luck with the book and with your life and your family.
Thank you.
And thank you for giving me this honor talking to you today.
Definitely. Thank you so much for having me.
You too. See you later.